on fire and life safety. Um, a little bit about myself. I'm a physiotherapist. I spent about 8 years working as a physiotherapist in the community, mostly with individuals with neurological disorders. And it only like examples of that would be traumatic or acquired brain injuries, spinal cord injuries, neurodegenerative, developmental. So I have a broad repertoire of experience with individuals with those sort of needs. And only recently did I actually switch to becoming a firefighter. That was about just over a year ago. So I often get quite a large reaction from people when they hear I switch from being a physiotherapist to a firefighter, as it's a big jump in career, but I don't know, I always think that it's pretty similar, right? The idea behind it is you're getting involved with the community, and I like working at the personal level with individuals, regardless of what it is. I still do both. Even though I'm a full-time career firefighter, I still see patients as well. Um, and I suppose this is the first opportunity I get to wear both hats at the same time, even though they're so different, as a physiotherapist and firefighter. And I want to thank Ali, who's in this call, for inviting me to do this talk and be able to have the opportunity to give this message of fire safety in home. And even though this is a brain injury, association that I'm delivering this message to, it really applies to everyone. And I want to keep the message I have fairly simple, so that you can take home. And if there is one thing to take home from all of this, is honestly, it is just have working smoke alarms and carbon monoxide alarms in your home. I will be talking about many other things as well, but if there's one thing to remember, it would be that. Before I begin, if anyone has any topics they have like burning questions or want to kind of focus on throughout this presentation, let me know now and we can have a chat about it, even beforehand or even at the very end. So if something is unclear, I'm speaking too fast, or if something didn't make sense, feel free to interrupt me, okay? Hopefully I could see it in the chat going on, or if you want to turn your mic, I'm fine with that too. All right. So the topics I want to cover firstly is the smoke and CO smoke alarms. So CO smoke alarms being carbon monoxide. The second is fire escape and emergency planning. And the third being fire and injury prevention at home. Now, before I talk a lot about the first topic of smoke and CO alarms, I actually want to show you a video here, and hopefully I can get that working. It works all right. But it's a fun video of Dan Doofus. The reason he's Doofus is because he has a lot of needs in knowing how to set up his alarms amongst his house. And we're all kind of doofuses because most of us don't actually know what that entails and what that means. So let me get this going. I could play that for you. Hopefully everyone can see this all right. And let me know if the volume doesn't work well.
Hey, Dan. Having a party, I see. Whose birthday is it? Is that a smoke alarm in the bird cage? It looks worn out. How old is that smoke alarm? Dan, that's too old for a smoke alarm. Smoke alarms need to be replaced every 10 years. Say, Dan, why is it in that bird cage? Dan, a chirping smoke alarm needs a new battery. A smoke alarm belongs on the ceiling or high up on the wall. And that one is far too old. You need a new smoke alarm. Do you have enough enough smoke alarms in your home? How many do you have? Dan, that's not enough. You need a smoke alarm inside each bedroom, outside each sleeping area, and on every level of your home. Dan? Dan? Dan! Are your smoke alarms working? You need to test your smoke alarms every month. Push the test button to see if it's working. Good job, Dan. You have working smoke alarms in your home. Working smoke alarms save lives. Make sure your home has enough working smoke alarms.
Okay, let me bring back my screen here. All right, before we go further and talk about like that video more about smoke alarms, I think a Lori had some questions.
Can you hear me?
You're quiet, but I can hear you.
Let me change it. Does my volume need to go up maybe? I don't know.
Let's
hear me
try.
now?
Yeah, I think it'll be good enough for me to hear. If not, I can.
Well, I can wait till the end. I have 4 more questions just from that video. So,
Oh,
so however you want to do this, because I'm going to have tons of questions. So,
all right.
so even if we go to that video, let's say, one of my questions is, does even hardwired smoke alarms need replacing?
Yes,
Everything?
even hardwired smoke
Even
alarms need
hardwired.
replacing. Like,
Okay.
generally, like we'll go over the kind of specifics of that video in a little bit more detail because I know it went by really quickly. But yes,
Yeah.
all smoke alarms need replacing at least every 10 years.
So, and so that's why if you want me to wait till the end, because maybe you'll answer the questions in the seminar. But the other thing I just want to mention, I don't know about anyone else, one of the challenges, I'm very smoke alarm, pro smoke alarm. But to get up and test them every month, ladder is an issue, especially for brain injury, balance and ladder and getting up on a ladder. But even without that, I have high ceilings, I live by myself, but that's an issue. So I always question, why do smoke alarms have to be so high? Can't they be here, right? But if the fire's here, can it be like at 5 feet where we can reach it and change the battery? And I always have to get someone in to, so that's an issue, the changing the testing and the monthly and changing the battery. So I don't know if there's a solution with that. But that I'll leave the rest of my questions for later.
Okay, so I'm actually not going to answer all of those questions right now because we will cover a few of those. So after we kind of finish the smoke alarm, if you have more questions that I didn't answer, feel free to remind me if I haven't answered those. But we'll talk about essentially the requirements and duties as a homeowner or even as a tenant you have to do, and some strategies that if you need assistance doing those things or tips of how to get it done on your own, then we can cover that as well. Alrighty. Alrighty. So smoke alarms. The one, kind of main message of that is make sure you have it on every level of your home. That is the requirement to have. It is the law, but more importantly, it is your responsibility for your own fire safety, right? Even better is to actually have one in each bedroom too, right? The minimum requirements to have on each level, but it's just you're better protected if you have it in all sleeping areas as well. That way you can better hear it. There's so many types of smoke alarms, like was mentioned before. There's interconnected, meaning it is plugged in by a wire, and if one goes off in the building, that means all of them go off. Some are just battery powered, and that's the only thing it goes off of. Some of them nowadays have obviously the sound of. There's even strobe lights that are more new. And the requirements to have smoke alarms in your home really depend on the type of building you have. So as a rule of thumb, I said every smoke alarm on each level of the home, but depending on when your home was built, it's based on the code of the time. So the most basic would be battery powered on every floor. Sometimes your building was built with interconnected smoke alarms on every floor, and that's the requirement. You can't ever go less protected than that. If you have interconnected, you can't just put batteries in. If your home is more new than, let's say, 2014, you're going to have interconnected battery strobe lights and are required to be in every single room of the home. So you're going to need to do a little bit of research on when your home was built and the requirements at the time, but essentially that is what is required of you in your home. All right. Now, when it comes to types of smoke alarms, there is a little bit of an issue with the detecting of it if you have, let's say, hearing or visual impairments, because those are the main modes of delivery of most smoke alarms. And there is a solution to that. So there is something called a bed shaker. So what a bed shaker is, it is something it's also battery powered as well as something you plug in. Usually you would keep it, let's say, beside your bed on like a nightstand. And when the alarms go off in your home, it will be able to know that it's going off. And there will be another kind of dongle add-on of that unit, which you put on either on your mattress or on your pillow. And as the alarms are going off, it'll vibrate. So if you happen to be sleeping, you'll still feel it. It's quite a strong vibration, and that will alert you if you need those requirements for visual or hearing impairments. Alrighty, so that kind of covers the variety of different types of smoke alarms in a kind of more simplified way. I know we talked about a lot of different types there, but I would say the main message here is at least on every level, have a working smoke alarm. So over here, this is what, your typical, I guess, battery powered smoke alarm would look like right here. It's interesting where a lot of people don't know that these things expire. Every single one expires, no matter how new the smoke alarm it is. The technology is essentially every 10 years, these things expire and need to be replaced. It's not as easy to kind of tell because I was mentioned before, sometimes they're really high up, they're very hard to read. More than often enough, as in this picture right here, you actually need to unscrew it off the ceiling to look at the date on it. So oftentimes it'll just say the date of manufacture. As you can see here, it just says, I think September 10th, 2010, and that's all you have. So it's kind of up to you to know that it's going to expire in 10 years, right? What I would recommend if you install or someone else installs a smoke alarm in your home, take a look at the date of manufacture. If it doesn't say when to replace it, write it on yourself and write it on the face of it so that you don't need to climb up or take it down to read it, because nobody's going to remember the date of their expiry 10 years later, right? It's not something that's on a radar. It's something you'll forget. But if it's in plain sight, when you test it every time, you'll know when to replace it. In this case, it would be September 10th, 2020, all right? Another thing is batteries, right? You should be replacing the batteries on your smoke alarms every year, right? That is to say, even within a year, there might be chirping that comes out of your smoke alarm. And that's different from the like a full-on alarm mode where it'll be like this high-pitched squeak that comes out of it maybe every minute. That just means the batteries are low and needs to be replaced. I get a lot of phone calls actually. People will call 911 from their smoke alarm chirping just because they don't know what is happening. It could be smoke, it could be CO, and especially if it's CO, there's no way to detect it as a human. So you're gonna call 911. But if you have that knowledge that chirp every minute just means it needs replacing the battery, then you can go ahead and do that. There's a lot of other information on these smoke alarms. You'll kind of read it in the fine print. It'll say like 3 long beeps means it's smoke. 4 beeps means it's a smoke alarm. So that it's like a three long beeps, beep, 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 it'll pause, and then it'll just repeat that. That's how you know it's smoke or CO. This happens to be a combination detector, so it does both. Not all alarms do that, right? It'll give more information on what the chirps mean, and if it is near the end of its life or it's defective, it'll go off as well. So you can read it if you like to get that information, but the most important part about, you know, looking on your smoke alarm is no one expires, right? To change the batteries annually. Okay, so with smoke alarms, you'll see on the face of it, every single one has a button on it. That button, sometimes you need to just hold it down for maybe a second or so, and you'll hear what the full alarm sounds like. Depending on how good of a cook you are, you might not need to test it every month. Some people burn their eggs more often and know their alarm is working just fine. But that's how you would do it. And this should be done once every month. So when we talk about maintenance, expires every 10 years. The batteries need replacing when chirping and once a year, and they need to be tested at least once a month. All right. Anyone have any questions on that so far? No, we're good. Okay. When it comes to the difference of smoke alarms and carbon monoxide, mostly the maintenance requirements for those two are the same, right? When I'm talking about how often they need to be changed, how they're maintained, the batteries, when they're tested, that's all the same. There are slight differences in the type of units and where they need to be placed, and we'll kind of briefly go over that. So let's talk about carbon monoxide alarms. So carbon monoxide, what is it? Essentially, it is a form of gas that if it is released in high enough quantities, it'll stop oxygen from being in your blood. And obviously that's bad because you need oxygen to live. And the problem with carbon monoxide is that you can't see it, you can't smell it, and you can't taste it. That's why it's known as the silent killer. The good thing about this is that we have technology that can detect it. This is what the sole purpose of a carbon monoxide alarm is. Now, some of them are standalone, like the one in the picture on this slide is a carbon monoxide alarm only. Nowadays, you probably will find them combined with your smoke alarm. So if you read it, it'll say both a smoke alarm and a carbon monoxide alarm. And when you test it, it'll test both at the same time. Sorry, Sandy has a question here. Can a smoke detector be 6 feet high on the wall? So when it comes to placement of both of smoke alarms as well as carbon monoxide alarms, smoke always rises up. So it really will depend on your ceiling height. Now, it's generally right on the ceiling or very near to your ceiling. So whether it's 6 feet high or not, it's mostly related to how high your ceiling is. Now you want it maybe a few inches from your ceiling at furthest, but on the ceiling is, they say, often better, which is obviously an issue when it comes to testing it, right? So we'll talk about a little bit more strategies at the end, but essentially if you have problems testing your smoke alarm monthly, if anyone comes and visits you, whether it's family, a PSW, whatever, have them tested. It's a very, very quick thing. It's literally a push of a button, takes 1 second. You'll hear the alarm. If you hear it, it's good. If it's more of a just a climbing up on a ladder issue, I don't recommend that, especially if you have mobility issues or if you have balance issues. Use a broomstick. Me, I go in people's homes all the time. Some ceilings are like really, really, really high. Just get a broomstick. I usually carry this little metal extendo stick, and that's how I push all the buttons. Can a smoke alarm chirp if the room gets too cold? Now, that's a little bit of a situational question. I think the more kind of broad way to answer that is these alarms, both smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, defective quite often, right? Sometimes it's even just like dust gets in them and they'll start even going full alarm mode, right? In those situations, you don't really know what's going on. Yes, if it's like smoke in the room, it's very obvious that yes, smoke caused it. But if you don't know and it's a combination detector, you have no idea if it's carbon monoxide, in which case you should call either 911, or even better, if you have no symptoms and nothing's immediately emergent, call a non-emergency line. They'll still send someone to help you and take a look at it. So don't just ignore it. If something's going off, do something about it. Now, back to your question of like chirping. Generally, chirping means non-emergency. Chirping in a smoke alarm is something generally you hear every minute. It's not as loud. It's just a small little squeak. That can mean, and it depends on the manufacturer, so you will need to read it, but generally means either the battery needs to be changed or possibly that the alarm is defective in some way. Like it's near the end of its life, it might be close to expiry, and that's why you'll hear the chirping. Whereas if the room gets too cold, I've never heard of chirping or alarms going off just due to being too cold. And in a power outage, it should still remain working, right? Even if you have interconnected alarm, meaning it's plugged in, it'll still have a battery in it, right? And when the power goes out, it should still be operational, which is why you change it every year, and why that alarm should let you know if it is low battery as well. And that's what the chirping should be. Let me read these questions here. Let me pull them up so I could read them. The other question was, what is the number for non-emergency? That is something that depends on your municipality and which fire department covers said municipality. So it's not a 911 number. Generally, if it's a non-emergency, you hopefully have some resources to look it up or even write it down ahead of time. But you could just type in wherever you live, the city, non-emergency fire dispatch up, and you could give them a call. Lori's asking, if it's hardwired interconnecting, does an electrician have to change the detector? No. So you could get all of these detectors at any local hardware store, right? If you live near a Canadian Tire, Home Hardware, Home Depot, they all carry an array of different types of alarms. If you have it interconnected, you need to pay attention to the brand of it and the model, because interconnected has a kind of specific proprietary plugin that you use, and you need to make sure you get the same model, because that's how they all talk to each other. So electrician does not need to do it, but it's something that you might need help with. It might require, yes, getting a ladder out for that one, depending on how high it is. And if you do need help, I strongly suggest you get someone to do it for you. Generally, you don't have to do it very often. These things are supposed to last 10 years. But yes, you do need the correct alarm. Lori's asking, can the battery get too cold to work properly and chirp in a power outage? That's unlikely. It's unlikely. I've never heard of that. Most batteries are pretty good at operating in quite an array of temperatures, and if it was that cold that the battery stopped working, I would be much more concerned about you before the battery getting too cold. Hopefully that answered some of those. Is any other questions about alarms specifically? We'll kind of briefly talk about them more in other sort of situations, but generally that's kind of the message I wanted to get off is how many do you need? Where do you need them? What do they do? And how to maintain them, right? No? Alrighty, I'm gonna move on here. Oh, right, I do have two lorries. Thank you. Alrighty, this next section is related to fire escape and emergency planning. Now, this is not just related to fire emergencies. This could be any emergency at home. If ever you feel your health or your life is in danger, it's good to have a plan before it happens. For most adults, it's not usual for us to panic in most situations. That's a little bit of a kind of a myth. that people think in case of a fire, you're going to panic. Usually, our first instinct is actually to help others, which is a good thing, but often can be a bad thing. Because if you don't plan for it and you're looking to help someone who you don't have a plan on where to find them and where to go, then you're putting yourself at unnecessary risk. And in the case of an emergency like a fire, there really is no time to spare. Every second counts. And I suppose I should ask, has anyone had an experience with any fires? Has anyone had a fire, either in their home or anything like that? Most people, I would say, do not, but it is a pretty traumatizing experience just for the ones involved, for neighbors, for family, even for responders. It kind of affects everyone. But to kind of really drive home the importance of having a plan, I do have another video. It's a little bit of a longer one. I don't want to play the whole thing, but I gotta give you the kind of the SparkNote versions of the video before I play it. This is a story about a kind of a real fire that happened. It is within a semi-detached home that was divided by a cinder block, and unfortunately, one of the entire homes was completely burnt, and a 5-year-old that lived there actually lost their life. And so the fire department of that city actually recreated that fire to get kind of information on what had happened. And I mentioned that it's a semi-detached home. The other home beside it was actually mostly unaffected by the fire. There's a little bit of minor smoke damage to it, but it's the same materials. It's essentially the same building. They recreated the exact same environment in the home that actually did burn down. And you kind of get to see the progression of a fire and how quickly things happen. I will talk about the important parts about the video as a homeowner after, but I do want to show that to you. So let me bring this up here for you. So I'm trying to change my screen to the video. Give me a second here. And if there's any issues hearing it, let me know, or seeing it.
Ontario has an exceptional fire service, but fire and smoke can travel so quickly that despite their best efforts, firefighters might not be able to rescue you or your family if a fire occurs in your home. In fact, most fire fatalities occur when the fire department's response time is 5 minutes or less. What you are about to see is the actual recreation of a fire that happened in a home early one morning. Even though the firefighters arrived within 3 minutes of receiving the call, the fire claimed the life of a 5-year-old boy.
I'm going to skip ahead here just to kind of skip some of the fluff and actually go right to the recreation of the fire so you can actually see what it looks like. So right here, when I'm about to play this, but this is one of the firefighters recreating the exact sort of fire environment of what happened. And as soon as that timer starts is when he sets it. And so you'll kind of be able to get an idea of how quickly this happens.
What we're seeing now is the alcove area in the living room of the simulation home. The kitchen is on the right side of the frame and the front door is on the left. A fire is being ignited on the wicker chair, which was determined to be the point of origin of the fire. The equipment hanging from the ceiling are the heat sensors installed to monitor the temperature of the room at various levels. The smoke is now pouring from the ignition point and a small flame is developing. The wicker chair is now burning. The ground floor smoke alarm activates. Remember, there was no ground floor smoke alarm in the actual fire. The fire is still in its early stages, but you can see that the toxic smoke layers are already beginning to accumulate at the ceiling level. If the occupants were alerted to the fire at this point, they would have had more time to safely escape. In a fire, every second counts. There is no time to spare. The smoke alarm on the second floor now activates. This is the alarm the family heard. At this stage, they are getting out of bed, gathering their children, and preparing to escape. These are the fire conditions that the family would have faced as they came down the stairs. At this point, the temperature in the room at the shoulder level is approximately 40 degrees Celsius. Watch closely what happens to the fire conditions when the front door opens and more oxygen is introduced into the room. At this stage, we believe the mother and 3-year-old are now exiting the front door. In the confusion of the growing fire, the father and older boy became separated, and the father barely escaped with his life. Unfortunately, the child had run back up the stairs and perished in the fire. Within 30 seconds of the door opening, the temperature on the first and second floors soared to over 700 degrees Celsius. The fire is spreading rapidly throughout the room as flaming paint is dropping onto the furnishings. The room is rapidly approaching its peak temperature of 900 degrees Celsius. All of the materials in the room are now burning, and in less than 3 minutes, we have reached flashover conditions. No one can possibly survive these conditions.
All right, I'm going to pause the video there and we'll kind of talk about it more. Let me bring myself back. Okay, so with that video, you'll probably notice that within 45 seconds, the first smoke alarm went off. Now, in that particular house, in that family, they didn't even have a smoke alarm on the first floor. For whatever reason, I don't know why, but they didn't have one. So they were both, or the entire family was on the second floor when the fire happened. And so they weren't even alerted to it. At a minute 30, that's when the second floor smoke alarm went off. That's when they started to even being alert to that there was a fire. Now, when that happened, there was a mother and the 3-year-old were able to leave the building within 30 seconds. Now, that's pretty good. The fact that they got out there in 30 seconds, that is a pretty good response time. And even still, the one big thing they did there is they left the door open. So as they left the front door, that was open, which anytime you leave a door open, especially to fresh air, it introduces a lot of oxygen into the house and it feeds the fire rapidly. An interesting statistic to know is that a fire will double in size every minute. It might even be more with oxygen like that being introduced to it. Now, the other family members, being the father and the 5-year-old, they were a little bit slower to leave. And as they were exiting, what was thought that happened is as they were going down the stairs, the 5-year-old got scared and got separated from his dad and actually went back upstairs. It is very, very thick smoke. It's very hot. There's not a lot of visibility. So you really have to know where you're going and knowing your own home and how to exit. That's why it's important to have an exit plan and know your building. But unfortunately, that 5-year-old who went back up lost their lives. And the father just made it out. And that was about at the 2-minute mark where the father left out. And by the time the firefighters got there, it was at the 3rd minute, which is just a minute and a half after the alarm even went off for them to be notified that there was anything going wrong. The house was fully involved fire in conditions that not even a firefighter would be able to survive inside of there. So that goes to show like it's not even every minute counts in a situation like that. It literally is every second. It's a hard story to hear, knowing that it's a real story and a child lost their lives in it, but it is one that is good to drive home the importance, because you never know when it's going to happen. And we're told to always have a plan of when it does happen. And I want to talk to you about what that plan is, like how to make that plan and what you should know. So the main points I want to go over is know your building and what that entails, how to call for help. And if you do find yourself in the very unfortunate situation of a fire, what should you do? All right. So what to know about your building. This will depend on the type of building you are. Are you in a bungalow? Are you in a 2-story home with a basement? Are you in a condo or an apartment? This will all really affect your planning, right? Who do you live with? Is it with a family? Do you live on your own? Do you have mobility needs that you require help with? Or does another family member that you have require help to get out? Do you have children who need assistance? As you can see in that video, the father was leaving with his 5-year-old, but he didn't have physical contact holding hands with his son leaving and got separated. And that can happen, especially with children, where it's not an uncommon response to do something like that. But if you are in a home, some things to know is on the main level, there should be 2 ways to get out of your home, right? If it's a house, generally it's your front door. The second one is usually your backyard door. Some people have side doors and other ways to get out, or maybe even to the garage, but generally you'll have 2 ways of exiting. And that's important depending on where a fire might happen. You need those 2 ways to exit sometimes. If you're in a condo or apartment, you're generally maybe on a higher level floor. You might need to use stairs to get down, especially in the case of a fire where the elevator stopped working, right? In that case, in an apartment or condo, you will have your own smoke alarms and carbon monoxide alarms in your unit. Those ones are not connected to the entire building. Those are just in your unit and more or less act as the same as anyone with a smoke alarm inside a house, right? But if there is a fire that is detected inside the actual building, like in the hallways, they have what's called heat detectors, and that are connected to another computer of the entire building. So if it detects something, it'll go through the entire building. So often we get 911 calls that relate to their smoke alarm going off in their unit, and they start to panic because it might be a cooking incident, and they're afraid that the fire department's going to come, or they're going to get in trouble with their building. That's not necessarily the case, and shouldn't be the case, because that is just your own personal smoke alarm. It's not a detector of the building that kind of alerts the whole building, right? When it comes to how to find exits, that is the really important part of escaping your building, right? If you live in a home and you have stairs, well, you have to know how to get down those stairs. If you need assistance doing it, someone should know that you require that help, right? We'll talk about situations if you find yourself trapped or unable to get out, if you have mobility needs and no one's available to help you. I'll kind of go over that as well. But generally, you should know how to get down the stairs if you need to, with or without help, and know what your exits are, whether it be the front door or backyard door. If you have a window to go out, so you'll see in this kind of diagram here, I know it seems a little bit complicated, but generally every room inside a building should have 2 ways to get out as well. That might be the door being the main one, but also a window. Now, window is definitely not ideal to go out, but there are situations where that is the only way out, especially if you're in a basement. That is a lifeline that someone might need to use, or it might be a way to get to you for emergency responders. But know where those things are. We'll talk about in case of emergency, if there's smoky conditions, you even forget where a window is, or if you're in a strange place, how to find them as well. But generally know how to get out of the room, know how to get out of your building. If you're in an apartment or condo, do you know where the stairs are located? Generally, there are two sets of stairs that lead out of a building, usually on kind of opposite ends of hallways, and they usually keep the elevator in like the middle of a hallway, but you might not always have the elevator available to you. Something else to note, that if you're someone who has mobility needs in case of emergency and you live in a apartment or condo, the building management, the superintendent should know. And if they know that, it can be documented in what's called the fire safety plan. It's a little box in front of every condo building, will have all the information about the building in case of emergency, and will and should include anyone that needs help in case of emergency. So if that kind of falls into the category of you, make sure you do that, because it can save you in a certain situation. Not just fires, even if it's a medical emergency, they need to know that how to get to you and that you need help. A meeting place for whoever you're living with, generally your family. So what that means is when you leave a building, you should have a place to meet up. Generally, if it's a home, it's right in front of the home. And that's important because I mentioned before that people tend to actually not panic when it comes to adults, at least in the case of a fire. The immediate trigger is to, oh, I need to help everyone outside of the building, whether it's a partner, whether it's children, whether it's an older adult, or maybe someone with mobility needs. They're going to be wanting to make sure everyone gets out. And though it's admirable, it often can be an issue. And it's an issue if you don't plan for it. If you, for example, have two children, well, the parents are the main caregivers there, and they need to talk about who is going to find each child and escort them out. And you need to have physical contact with them the entire way until you get out. If you, let's say, didn't have a plan, right? And in the situation we talked about before with the 3 and 5-year-old, if, let's say, the dad went to get both children, got outside the building, they didn't have a meeting place, the mom might be wandering around that home looking for her children, right? And take precious time trying to exit. And that obviously put her in safety just because they didn't have a plan. So having that meeting place and knowing who is assisting whoever needs assistance out is important. I kind of touched on the last point there, mobility impairments or young children. And that will depend on whether you're living on your own in a home or a condo or apartment. But that's the general gist of how to plan. Did anyone have any questions with this kind of section of planning your emergency? Yeah, Laura, you have some questions? What are my thoughts on fire ladders? Now, those are actually only exist on much older buildings. Those, it'd be, if you have one already, then you'll probably know that you have a fire ladder. But those are essentially on people's almost like balconies they have in kind of high-rise buildings, and it's usually a metal ladder that gives you another means of exiting or egress in case you're trapped in a high-rise. My thoughts on that is, if you have one and you have no way of leaving your building, meaning you can't get out the main hallway, can't use the elevator, and that's your only mean of getting out, and you can use a ladder, absolutely use it if you have to. We'll talk about a situation if you're kind of caught in a situation where there's a fire and you can't actually get out because you're either being blocked or have mobility issues. But if you're able to take a ladder to get out and that is your only option, absolutely do it. That's my suggestion. Even if it's a window, right? And that's your only way to get out, then sometimes that is a choice you'll have to make, whether it's going out the window, even if you're on, let's say, the 3rd floor. And that's the only other option you have, and no one's getting to you in time. Only one exit I'm referring to the one use of only ladders. So I think your question is, you can get out your front like door essentially of the unit, and the only other way out being that ladder.
I don't
Is
even
that
have the
the
ladder.
story?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I could hear you.
So I don't even have the ladder. I just learned of it, that one even exists. I only have one exit. It's a 100-year-old building, so there's no, and it's above a store.
Okay.
So there's no other exit. And then I just learned of these disposable almost, fire ladders that you can buy at Home Depot or wherever, that you would, smash out a window and flop it and it would get you out. But you can only use it one time. It's kind of, you put it under the window kind of thing, Velcros together. I'd never heard of them before. And then just last week I heard of it, and then you were
I
coming, just great.
honestly, I've only heard of it as well. I've never heard of it being like being taught as either from like the provincial level as a piece of fire equipment that you should have. So I don't know much about their efficacy and how well they work, how safe they are, and who it's essentially for. But I would say if you're in a bad situation like that,
Yeah,
and that's what you have, it's more ways to get out, especially if you only have one exit.
yeah, okay.
It's maybe worth having if you are able to use a ladder and that's your only other way out, then there might be something in that, right? Again, soon I will be talking about like if you're actually trapped and can't get out, what to do. But that would be my advice to you on that one. Whereas having more is generally better. I can't comment on how effective that is and how easy it is to use. That might depend on the kind of exact conditions of your building and your unit. Alrighty.
Thank you.
Alrighty. All right. I don't want to spend too much time on this one because it's more or less kind of self-explanatory, but generally, most people might only call 911 once in their lives or not even at all. And the two pieces of information that you need to have on hand when you do call 911 is know your full address and know your own phone number, right? The dispatchers, when you call, will be able to kind of obviously help you through it, but when you're talking fast, you're slightly panicked and it's hard to get that information out, and it's going to delay help coming to you. But as a rule of thumb, as I mentioned before, if you feel like your safety and life is in danger, call 911, okay? I mentioned here that there's a non-emergency line because an example of this is, let's say you have some mobility issues and you happen to either do a transfer or you happen to fall. You're not necessarily injured, you're not at risk health-wise, but you need help getting up. That's a good reason to call emergency line if you need help. That non-emergency line, you'll get to the dispatchers, you'll give them your address, you give them their unit number, let them know any access codes there are to the building so it's easier for them to get in depending on your municipality you're in. This might be firefighters or it might be ambulance coming to you, but they're able to help you off the floor or wherever you are to get that transfer done. But that's another reason or means of calling for help. That's not necessarily 911. Some other useful things to have, especially if you do live on your own, is have your medical history, have the medications you take on your fridge. That way, when responders come, they can get you help a lot faster and know what the issue is right away, right? Is there anything else I can talk about? No, I would say that's the main points I want to get across, is that, again, if you feel like you're in danger, call 911. It's fine. You're not going to get fined. No one's going to reprimand you, even if it is a reason you don't need to be calling 911. But there's also a non-emergency line if you know how to use that as well. Alrighty. This section is what to do in a fire, right? there's some points in here. If you are in a fire and you have the means of escaping a building, this will again depend on whether you're in a kind of a house or whether you're in an apartment or a condo type building. But if it's smoky conditions, get low and get out. As you go through any doors, close them. This will save you lots of time of that fire spreading throughout the building. For one, oxygen is not fed to the fire, and two, every door and wall inside a building is fire rated. Some are fire rated for containing a fire for an hour, some are 15 minutes, but if you leave it open, you saw how fast things can spread in that video I showed you before. As you're leaving, let's say it's a condo, alert others as you exit. So you'll kind of see in the picture right here, that is what a fire pull station looks like. So pull that and keep getting out. You don't have to go to door, knocking on everyone's door, telling them to get out. If there's a fire, pull that. That will set off the alarms in the entire building. And once you get outside, then you could call 911 once you're safe outside the building in your meeting spot. In the case that you can't do these things, you will have to shelter in place. Now, this is if the fire, smoke, or heat conditions are trapping you from leaving the building. For you, Laura, you only have one exit, right? You might have to find a room, close the door. What that'll do is it'll buy you lots of time in terms of the fire spreading. What you want to do in that situation, especially if it's smoky, is shove any towels in the crack of the door so that no smoke seeps in. Once you do that, you're calling 911. You're going to tell them the address and that there's a fire and that you're trapped. You're going to give them their unit number. You're going to tell them exactly where you are, and you're going to be the fire department's and the firefighters' highest priority, right? When they come in. If you need to, open a window, make sounds, whatever attention you can do to get people, throw some towels out, shine some lights, they'll be able to find you more easily. But if you do open a window, make sure you have that door closed, right? Otherwise it'll introduce oxygen and spread faster. So that's my advice to you for a situation like that is get yourself in a room, close the doors, call 911, right? All right, I'm gonna kind of fly through the last sections because I kind of gave the message I wanted to give regarding smoke alarms and planning for an emergency. This part is just essentially tips on how to prevent injuries and prevent fires in general. Most fires relate to cooking. So if you're cooking, stay in the kitchen while you're doing it, use a timer, don't do it when you're tired, or if you're drowsy from medication, right? That's not a good time to cook. If you smoke, do it outside, and if you're a smoker, you should know how to dispose of it safely, as well as don't smoke inside your bedroom. You might fall asleep, and that's often how fires do start. When it comes to electrical fires, space heaters are a big one. So make sure there's at least 3 feet or a meter from every space heater so that it's not heating up anything in the room or burning anyone, and don't load up electrical sockets, right? So those are probably things you heard about, but preventing fires is the best situation rather than finding yourself in an emergency with a fire. Lastly here, this is my physio side to things for a moment if I put it on, but most injuries that happen at home are related to falls, right? And being on top of your exercise, your mobility needs, working on balance is a way to prevent this. Take your time, make sure you're keeping areas where there's walking, whether it's inside or outside your home, clear and clear of things to trip on. Make sure you get your eyes checked often enough, because if there's changes in that, it's very related to your balance. And make sure there's proper lighting throughout your home, right? Whether that's the stairs from your bedroom to your bathroom. And lastly, if you find changes in your mobility, you should get an occupational therapist to assess you and be able to recommend things to install in your bathroom, whether it's grab bars or a kind of telephone shower or elevated seat. Alrighty, so I want to kind of leave the last few minutes to, if anyone has any questions for me.